Follow Your Own Arrow. We are completing our series today on Emerson and New Thought, and we're completing it with an essay called Self-Reliance. And that's what this song is about, isn't it? Is going your own way, making your own decisions. You can't please everyone, right? And that's what self-reliance is about. And it's my favorite essay in this whole series of Emerson essays. And I think it's because it speaks to freedom, personal freedom, and independence. And it also is in very tight alignment with the science of mind. And as we move through the talk today, you'll understand why. There's so many great quotes in this essay also. And many of them are inside of the science of mind teaching also, if you've been a student of the science of mind. So let's explore Self-Reliance by Emerson. Emerson wrote this essay in 1841. He was 38 years old. 1841 is about 20 years before the Civil War. Now, that's almost 200 years ago. How could it possibly have meaning for us today? America has changed a lot in the past 200 years. But has human nature changed a lot in 200 years? I think you'll see that the ideas are quite relevant to us today as much as they were then, which is why actually this essay is still pretty popular. Emerson argues in this essay that we should know our true selves, that we should know our minds, rather than looking to other people to tell us what to think or how to think, to tell us what our opinions should be, what ideals and values that we should hold, and to embrace the divine idea that each one of us is, rather than resisting that. Now, these sound pretty relevant to us today, particularly in the polarized time that we live in, with a lot of folks telling us how we should be and whichever side of an argument that we should be on. We've got the media, mainstream and social, that is very influential. I don't know if you've stopped to realize how much video we're exposed to in our lives. I mean, we even have video billboards now, right? You're driving down the road and there's things changing and flashing. Used to be you had the billboard and you got used to what was there and you knew what it said and there you go. But now it changes every few seconds. Everything we turn on. I mean, if I look for music, I find music videos. So I'm exposed to a lot of that. Have you heard something called groupthink? Have you heard groupthink? This is an example of what that might look like. Herd mentality. We've heard of herd mentality. Going along to get along. Don't rock the boat. That's kind of what these guys are doing, right? They're all saying, yeah, I agree. But they're thinking something different, aren't they? Thinking something different. This is sometimes how we don't think for ourselves, or at least don't express what we're thinking. And all of these are contrary to this idea of self-reliance that Emerson's talking about. He says, nothing is at last sacred but the integrity of your own mind. Cultivation of one's own opinions and thoughts, even if they are at odds with those of the people around them. For whatever reason, when I read this quote, it made me think of the phrase politically correct. Now, I agree with the definition of politically correct, which is not excluding, marginalizing, or insulting groups who are socially disadvantaged or discriminated against. We can all get behind that, right? Where I have a challenge is using that as a substitution for real conversations that could actually be transformative and change social norms and behaviors. It's like we slap on this idea of politically correct conversation and avoid what really is happening and not having that powerful conversation that can open things up to true change. And that, again, is what Emerson talks about. He suggests that knowing our own minds is much more valuable and important to us than allowing ourselves to be swayed by whatever's happening around us. But we first have to know our minds, right? We have to know what we're thinking. And that requires some quiet time, because there's so much input coming at us all the time that sometimes we need to step away, step back, and get quiet and get still and explore inner space, as they say. What do I believe? What do I think? What do I think about this thing, situation, event, whatever is happening in the world around me? What do I think about it? Not what all the talking heads tell me to think about it, but what do I think about it? What do I believe about that? Are those beliefs true, or are those beliefs out of some sort of a fear? Or because my family thinks that way, I need to think that way. Or all my friends think that way, so I need to think that way. I can't rock the boat, right? We need to know our minds. We need to know what we think. This world around us can be very distracting and demanding of our attention, our agreement. In order to know what we think, to actually know what we think, we have to develop that inner quiet and be willing to ask ourselves those questions and filter out all of the noise of what we've heard from other people and go deep within and ask, what do I think? What do I believe? And then the work that is ours to do after that is staying there, isn't it? We talked a couple of weeks about fixing it and keeping it fixed. We have to stay there, grounded in our truth. Now, there's a paradox coming a little later in this conversation, so just hang on to that thought. Emerson says, it is easy in the world to live after the world's opinion, and it is easy in solitude to live after our own. But the great is he or she who, in the midst of the crowd, keeps with perfect sweetness the independence of solitude. In other words, when we get into a crowd, we are not arguing and resisting and fussing and having to have it our way. We stand in that sweetness of the independence of our thinking. We're not swayed by what we hear. We're in the sweetness of the independence of our own thinking. That's what he's talking about here. Can we stay true to our own principles and values when we are surrounded by those that don't agree? Can we stay there without fighting, without arguing, without having to be right? Am I the only one that has to be right sometimes? Ooh, oh, thank you. My comrade here, thank you. Like that cartoon earlier, it can be tough to do though, can't it? Do you speak up in meetings? Are you agreeing, voting yes, when your head is screaming no, because you don't want to rock the boat? Have you ever spoken up and then suddenly people start saying, oh yeah, I was thinking about that and I wasn't quite sure, but I didn't really know how to express. I thought everybody else knew, and gosh, thank you for speaking up. Let's talk about that part. You ever had that happen? Yeah. So we all do that. We do that out of fear. We hold back out of fear. Usually it's happened in a prior time of our life, usually when we're younger, and we've expressed some opinion, perhaps bold, and it wasn't well received. Perhaps we were shut down. Perhaps we were invalidated, and that hurt. And our subconscious went, not going to do that again. That was way too painful. And we stuffed that down. And so anytime an opportunity like this comes up, we have a tendency to retreat and go into safety of numbers. I'll go along to get along because that was really painful. We may not have any memory whatsoever of what that was. It was that painful that it's been stuffed that deep. But that reaction continues to be that protection within us. It continues to be there. But when we can become solid and anchored in our beliefs and confident in expressing them, living our values, walking them out, so to speak, walking our talk, then there's no incongruency between how we be and who we are and what we say. And so it's much easier to speak up and to honor our truth and to stay anchored and grounded in that. Have you discovered that there are lots of folks who want us to believe the way they believe? Anybody come across that? Whether it's politics, religion, maybe it's social justice issues, maybe it's sports teams. You gotta root for the Cardinals. You live in Arizona, right? So there's a lot of people trying to get us to change our minds and change our opinions about things. And then there's the others that think they know best for us. Now, most of us learned this with our parents, and they probably did know best for us. Let's face it, we resisted that growing up, but they probably knew best. But there's a lot of people now today who think they know best for us. Has anybody ever started a conversation with you with, you should, you should, you should, you really should? I am really working on not doing that because I don't know what you should do. I really don't. Only you know what you should do. You are infinite intelligence. You have access to everything you need. Tap in. I can't should you. I don't know. Now, I might question your choice. Have you considered? Have you thought about? What if? Is it possible that? To have you to think more broadly, perhaps. But I really am trying to break the habit of you should. You should. Excuse me. Emerson suggests that if we choose to conform to what others believe instead of what we believe, we will lose our very soul. We will lose our very soul, our originality, our connection to the mystery, our creativity and aliveness. We, in effect, sell our freedom. He says, whoso, hard to say, would be a man must be a nonconformist. He who would gather immortal palms must not be hindered by the name of goodness, but must explore if it be goodness. Nothing is at last sacred but the integrity of your own mind. Along the same lines of conformity is consistency. How do we stay in principle without becoming rigid in our beliefs? Remember last month we talked about that a little bit in our aging series, that sometimes as we age we can get a little rigid in our thinking and no longer be growing, learning, expanding. This is the paradox. This is the paradox that we talked about. This is Emerson, a foolish consistency is the hobgoblin or gremlin of little minds, adored by little statesmen and philosophers and the divines. That's what they called reverends back then. With consistency, a great soul has simply nothing to do. He might as well concern himself with his shadow on the wall. Now remember, we were talking about not the world's opinion, but our own. And now here he seems to be saying, yeah, but you don't want to be consistent about it. How do I stand in my truth and not be consistent about it? When we become rigid in our thinking and our opinions, we stop growing. Would you agree? We stop growing. What if we had decided to continue to believe what Ernest talked about in The Science of Mind when he talked about the ethers? The ethers. We now know that today as the quantum field. No, it's not the quantum field, it's the ethers. We'd be hanging on to that old rigid belief rather than opening up to new discoveries in science, which has now determined the quantum field. Ernest talks about being open at the top. We should remain open at the top. He talked about our movement in that way, that we not close off things, particularly with his demise, with his writing, but to continue to be open at the top, to continue learning, receiving this new information, these new sciences. He knew that things were going to continue to grow and expand, and we're going to continue to learn. He knew that. So he said, receive this new information, remain open at the top, grow. But don't imitate. Don't imitate. Emerson says there is a time in every man's education when he arrives at the conviction that envy is ignorance, that imitation is suicide, that he must take himself for better or for worse as his portion, that though the wide universe is full of good, no kernel of nourishing corn can come to him but through his toil bestowed on the plot of ground which is given him to till. Excuse me. The plot of ground is our life. The kernel of corn is our good. And though the universe be filled with good, we have to do our work, right? We have to do something with this life that we've been given. The universe is filled with good. It's there for us, but it's the idea of treat and move your feet. We participate in our life through the tilling of our world, of our life that we have. What is it that we want to create? We live in this field of infinite possibilities. What is it that we want to create? Have you ever attempted to imitate someone? Not impersonate, but imitate someone. Think way back over your life. As I did, I recalled my 20s. Long time ago. I was fresh off the bus, so to speak, in Dallas, Texas, and I was quite a country bumpkin. My clothes didn't fit well. I had no idea how to apply makeup and didn't know anything about hairstyles, and I was a bit overweight. And I didn't fit in my environment very good. I wasn't comfortable. So I befriended a couple of ladies that I worked with who were rather polished, and I began to imitate them. I began to try to dress like they dressed. I began to try to talk like they talked. I began to try to emulate their makeup and hairstyles and do the things they talked about doing. Well, I'm going to tell you all the gory details, but needless to say, that didn't work out so well. And I wasn't comfortable in their facade either. So I had to find my own way, my own style, my own way of being that I felt comfortable for me and in my environment. I had to let all of that go. Whenever we try to imitate someone else, we kill our own originality. It was interesting when I started ministerial school, looking around the room and hearing everybody else's experiences and things. And then we went through this class called homiletics, where you learn to talk on stage. and watching different people and thinking, I like that style, I like this style, I like this style, I like this style. And then listening to some of our senior ministers around our movement, I like that style, I like that style. And I came to the realization that none of that matters. Those are great examples. But the only way I can do it is my way. The only way I can do it is my way. I know the teaching. How do I talk about it? How do I understand it? How do I present it to you? I have to be me. I can't stand here and be anybody else. Joe's got a style of presenting. Lee's got a style of presenting. You've got a style of presenting. We all do. And all we can be is our own individualized expression of the divine doing us. The idea of you do you, right? I'll do me, you do you, and we're all doing God. So it's great. It's great. So we have to return home. We have to return to being ourselves. And that's what Emerson's suggesting. Be yourself. Everybody else is taken. Be yourself. He says, we but half express ourselves and are ashamed of that divine idea which each of us represents. When we hold back in fully expressing our divinity out of fear, God's possibilities are not fully expressed because we've limited it by the fear that we have. We've said no. And being beings of choice, we get that right, don't we? We can say no. We can limit it. We can limit it. Spirit's not limited, but we can limit its flow through us. So rather than limiting our lives, we can release the fear. We can let that go and embrace the divine idea that we are and allow ourselves to be that full representation of the divine, of God. Allow Spirit's light to shine through us, through you. This essay is just packed with inspiration to empower us to express Spirit, to be ourselves, to stand in our truth and in our power, as only we can, as that individualized expression that we are. But many, most of the time, some all the time, hold back, limit that. Too much, not me. Emerson encourages us to know ourselves and stand boldly in that truth and yet be open and flexible to that which is new, not get rigid in our thinking, living in the paradox. Living in the paradox. So if you'd like to live in the paradox, learn some of these principles in your life, you can sign up for our Mindful Monday newsletter that comes out Monday mornings. It's an email I send out that's a recap of the talk. And you can then use these practices throughout the week to embody more of the Science of Mind teaching in your life. And so today I've got actually 3 steps for us. Ernest Holmes provides 3 steps in acquiring spiritual self-reliance. Now, in all of the writings that I explored with Holmes from preparation for this talk, he always puts spiritual in front of self-reliance. Emerson's essay was simply self-reliance, and Ernest always said spiritual self-reliance, which I thought was interesting. But he provides 3 steps to acquiring spiritual self-reliance, and that's going to be our process this week, okay? Number 1, believe in God with the intensity of my whole being. Believe in God with the intensity of my whole being. This week, use your journal and structure that as a question. Do I believe in God with the intensity of my whole being? Describe what that means to you. And if you don't feel like you do believe in God with the intensity of your whole being, ask yourself what that would look like. What would it look like if I did believe in God with the intensity of my entire being? And then how do I practice this? How do I get from where I am to where I want to be? If I'm there, how do I practice it and stay there? Do some deep journaling work this week around this question. Number 2 is believe in the reality of the spiritual self as forever one with God. Believe in the reality of the spiritual self as forever one with God. Now, every day this week, I invite you to pull out your Science of Mind, turn to page 33, and at the bottom of the page is a little heading that says Divine Nature is in Every Man. Read that section through the end of that chapter. It's about a half a page. And it's a summary, basically, of the thing itself, which is in the first 4 books of the Science of Mind. And it's where Ernest is recapping, what is God? And then asking ourselves, what does this mean? Am I one in God? Am I one in God? Take that into your contemplation. And number 3, establish a continual communion with the Spirit, which is forever within and around us. This week, practice living in a prayerful state of mind. Remember, it was Jesus that suggested pray without ceasing. Now, this does not mean we walk around with our eyes closed all week, okay? We're not going to have to do that. But it does mean that we are going to assume an attitude of receptivity, an attitude of knowing the divine order and action of life, an attitude of recognizing in everything in our environment, God is. God is. In every event, situation, person, thing, God is. That is keeping us in that prayerful attitude. And just like our meditation, when our mind wanders off the path, we simply bring it back to that state of knowingness. That state of knowingness. So those are Ernest's 3 steps to acquiring spiritual self-reliance. To wrap up my talk and our series for this month about Emerson and his impact on New Thought and on Ernest Holmes in particular, I pulled out my copy of Ernest Holmes, His Life and Times, which is written by Fenwick Holmes, his brother, in collaboration with Ernest. Fenwick finally talked Ernest into a biography late in life. He's like, Ernest, come on, we got to do a biography. We've got to record your life. And Ernest said, well, I don't want to be deified, and I don't want to be made out to be some sort of a demon or something. And he goes, well, then let me write it. I'm your brother, let me write it. So Ernest provided him with a lot of his writings, and they had a lot of conversations about a lot of things that had happened. And there's a section in here about Ernest discovers Emerson. Ernest discovers Emerson. And I think it's in Ernest's words. So this is Ernest talking. He says, I began to realize that Emerson was talking not only to men, but also about man. I did not know anything about the subtleties of the self, but I had a definite interest in the soul. My religion had definite dealings with the soul. It could be saved or damned, I was told, but I had no concept of it. The soul had been pictured to me in art as a half-naked and translucent man trailing white draperies en route to a cloud, in and on which others similarly clad figures were blowing trumpets and singing choruses. It used to chill me. I had seen no correlation between soul and self and man. But when I read Self-Reliance, I find that I had taken short excursions into the fields of abstract thought. Not in those terms, to be sure, and it rang a bell in me. It corresponded to something I had felt but had not thought. It is otherwise impossible, I think, to explain the impression made upon me. We can read a thing, but if there is nothing in our consciousness that recognizes it, it has no meaning. Perhaps it was the appeal to me of something that I wanted to be, that I ought to be, that I was determined to be, that drew me with almost dramatic intensity. I became suddenly aware that Emerson was talking about me. I instinctively linked the words self and soul and man and me. It didn't spring up in my mind like a flower full blown, but it filled it like a rosy mist. I suppose the essay was about everybody, but that thought did not concern me at all until long afterwards when I began to feel the urge to tell others what I had discovered for myself. At the moment, all I could think was, there's more to a person than he realizes, that is beyond ordinary experience. Here is a mature man, a great man, a terrific man, and he affirms that there is something in you that is great too. For the first time in my life, I thought that whatever was going to happen to me would be due to something that was already in me. It was vague, and I admitted to myself that whatever it was needed a lot of investigation, but nevertheless, I believed that I was on the track of an entirely new thing. Here is a new field of consciousness, I felt. And even at that moment, I knew I would get the answer to some questions that the church had not given me. But I did not attempt to compare Emerson's teachings with those of theology at first. I was too interested in discovering his meaning. Think it had an impact? Fenwick says this was for Ernest the breakthrough from the midnight of theological questioning into the twilight of metaphysical thinking and philosophy. So it started with Emerson. It started with self-reliance. So ending our series, I think, is applicable to that, with that impact on Ernest, the Science of Mind teaching. When we read and study Science of Mind in this essay, we can see the thoughts merged. So thank you very much for your time today. And it's time for questions and answers. It's time for conversation. It's time for discussion. What's on your mind? No? No? That's right. Who said that? It's in the Bible? It's also over the archway at Delphi, right? Know thyself? Probably, yeah. Probably, yeah.
So if we have those ideas.
Let the folks at home hear you. Oh, yeah.
If we have those ideas about self, there are a lot of selves. And we're talking about self, not self-sufficiency or self-knowledge. Because if we rely upon our own self-knowledge, I've found that the more I know, the more I don't know. And how do we reconcile that? If I'm relying on my self-knowledge, I'm not open, as Ernest Holmes said, open and willing to accept other concepts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But if I'm spiritually open to that, then am I able to do that, or what?
Good question. I think that's why Ernest puts spiritual in front of self-reliance, is because it's not the self-reliance of our mind, of our brain, and our knowledge, our intellect at the human level. It is self-reliance on our spiritual self, which is our soul, which is our higher self, which is that which is one in the one with spirit and with source, that has infinite knowledge, infinite wisdom. And self-reliance is reliance upon the soul within us that knows all. Not on the intellect and the human self that knows a little bit. Great question. Great question. Who else? No? Gosh, I thought y'all would have a lot to say about self-reliance. Nobody? All right. Wow. Wow. Last chance. Huh? I overwhelmed you? I didn't mean to overwhelm you. I really didn't. I oversold it. Ugh, hate when I oversell it. All right, well, you're just going to have to pray with me. Are you ready to pray? All right. So as we go within, we recognize that there is one power, presence, life. And that is the infinite. It is infinite wisdom and intelligence. It is peace and wholeness and harmony. It is love. It is that which we call God, Spirit, Source, energy, life, the universe, the universal presence. It really doesn't matter what we call it. Ernest called it the thing itself. But it is that which is greater than all that is. It is that which is creator of all that is, out of itself, out of its love. And I know that all of that is here now present in this room, in through and as each one of us as individualized and unique expressions of it. And I know that as we are expressions of it, we are created of it, of its substance, of its source, and that we have access to all that it is. We are one in the one with each other, one with all of life, one with all that is, and one in God. There's no separation. There's not God in anything else. We are one. And so knowing that, I speak my word for and about each of us today as we have come together in the recognition of this oneness, of this one life, and of our presence in it. Unique as we are, individualized as we are, accepting our own divinity, standing in our own truth, and yet staying open at the top and receptive to that which is new and expansive. We create the life in which we live, move, and have our being. We till the soil of our life, bringing forth manifestations, bringing forth love, bringing forth joy and peace, harmony. I bless this center today, knowing that Scottsdale Center is a divine idea in the mind of God, and that it is divinely sourced of that one substance through its members and guests and all who attend, all who connect with this community. I know that it is abundantly blessed with prosperity, and that its ideas are circulated out and about into our city, our state, our country, and beyond as this message moves forward and circulates. I know for anyone today that has anything on their heart that they are seeking prayer around, as they lift it up into this prayer, into this consciousness of this room, that we as community hold them in our love, in our light, in our blessings, and in our knowingness of the manifestation of that which they seek, that which they desire, whether it's healing, whether it's something to be revealed and clarified, whether it is employment, creative expression, joy, relationship, love, peace, harmony. No matter what it is, we just hold all of this love and these prayers together, knowing that it is so. It is with great gratitude, joy, and thanksgiving that I release this prayer into the action and activity of law, knowing that it is done. It is already done in the mind of God. And we accept its manifestation here and now as we affirm together, and so it is.